Greetings, all praise the King. Welcome to Eyewitness, where we reason to discover the truth. Today, we are speaking about oppositional staging. Oppositional staging is a form of witchcraft. It is part of the art of deception. It's a basic concept. It's difficult to describe. What it is the appearance that there's one object that's distant or opposed to another object. Now, it may be a subject as well. To simplify it, we'll just consider these to be the two domains. Now, typically, we think about this in terms of a person. This was what we would call staged opposition. Which is a component of oppositional staging, an umbrella term encompassing this staged opposition, which would be, for example, a person and another person. You know, one reason why you would do this is if, let's say, one person has a following and this is what we refer to as the population. And there's an objective to move this population, towards something. Maybe they would like for the population to work harder for less. So they realize this population is underneath the person. They're not underneath this person. If this person can make the population believe that this person is their enemy, then whatever this person says, for example, these people will go against. That's a staged opposition. Probably the most simplest concept of the examples that we're here to show. You can also have entire systems against each other. This could be, for example, if there's a law and, let's say there's a religion that conflicts with this law, then you can make the appearance that these are opposed to each other, and if the population follows the religion, then they'll do what this law doesn't say them to do. So that's an example that we're not going to see. Instead, we'll see the opposite. The religion claims to be the law, but the law is of man. Within this is, the institutions. All these institutions are funded by the same people, the world classes. And the world classes would like to keep the world in a form of bondage. In other words, they would like to get more out of people than less. So they have to make it appear that there's a distance between the functions of their government. And that's so that people think that this thing is fair. So when you have the, let's say, FBI is saying, the local police not doing the right thing. When you have the case with the pedophile billionaire that controlled the local police, yet you had this distance appearance between the federal government, which permitted him to molest the children, and the local police. You have these organizations that claim to represent people's rights. The police won't make up a nasty lie and, for example, search your house and take your equipment if you're a journalist, because we're protected. This is the illusion. And so these organizations, ACLU for one, exist to make people think that there's an alternative, that it's not all one way, that there's somebody fighting for your right. When you consider, however, what this one organization is up against, it really makes little as to how, intent that organization is on protecting you. They don't have real powers, but the appearance is there, and the appearance is there because they'll tell you about it, for example, on their news. This is a big one here, where they have different news agencies that claim to be on opposite spectrums. However, they represent the same cause and they're owned by the same people. These are the news organizations that reach people 99% of the time. I have not been able to find this account on YouTube, searching for it by myself. It has to do with the distribution. So most people will only see what the institutional news organizations provide. And the way that they'll be able to get away with that is by saying that there's a variety, right? They call it liberal and conservative. These terms are universal. In other words, they play the same game in other nations. Now, all this is what they call politics. And nevertheless, it leaks into, the everyday life of what we're seeing as reality. The idea, again, is that these people are so opposed to each other. Nevertheless, no matter who is in the leadership role, they say this side or that side, the same decisions are made, and we are left with the same results. And you have the rebels. This is more a newer concept, whereas, the Babylon realizes that we know what they are doing. And because we cannot agree with that, then they have to bring out these models to, make people that know that this thing is wrong, listen to it. Now, these people always claim to be against this man's device. And yet, who are they? Right? A lot of times, the real trick that they've used now is purely based on appearance. And this could be the appearance of the body. This could be the appearance, of somebody's voice, somebody's gestures. If you have someone who says that they're anti-war, for example, and they sound like Minnie Mouse, no matter what they say, people won't feel it. It's really about the feeling. The spirit is there. And if the spirit is not, then people recognize this. So, this is the mix-up, whereas, you have these organizations, the BLM, that are the revolutionaries of today, that are going to, fight for people. But when you look at them, they don't look like revolutionaries. Ultimately leaving people confused, which would be the goal. And when people are confused, they are willing to listen to the most simplest form of information. They'll flock towards the traditional news sources. Yeah. This is the idea behind this fake news. They control the internet totally. The militaries, the Babylonian, Roman forces. And, they flood it with a bunch of crap. So that it exhausts people in their mind. And then they're willing to listen to the regular organizations because they've been around. They're more or less presenting a more fancier presentation. So people take it as credible. Now, you also have within this, theories. This is where the witchcraft gets complex. We talked about the stage oppositions. These are the objectives. The rebel, And he's gonna tell you, all about what's going on, but he's not gonna give you any solutions. Yeah, and he's gonna look like a fool. Not gonna look serious. Then you have, or he could look too serious, And then you have these theories, right, which is a subjective concept, and for example, the first inhabitants that escaped from persecution and decided to set up a religious colony in the U.S. we know as Pilgrims. later on, you have these people, these savages. Some of them had come on the Mayflower. Like, they had different ideas. At the same time, before this, you had the colony in Virginia, which had already was the incubator for the African slave trade in this region. The separatists had no involvement in the African slave trade. The separatists began to trade with the natives in wampum, which the foreign forces decimated through the influx of not counterfeit but actual seashells. Now you have the theory, right, that from these people, what they call the pilgrims, comes the African slave trade. So, to eliminate the truth, you present this lie which grasps the attention of those that have been neglected. The objective is to eliminate any possibility that people will accept a religious form of government. And you mix it up with the African slave trade, just as they have done with the scripture, to say that the Bible was the justification for the oppression, that people justified the form of slavery through the scriptures. When people hear this, they're turned away from the scripture, and they're turned towards this new theory, which shortly therein dies. You remember the protests in Baltimore, people going around, and you had the city commission saying, hey, we need to stop this. So what they did was they made these promises. They didn't plan on keeping them, but it was enough to quell the public. Yeah, we're going to charge the officers. And this is oppositional staging. It's not necessarily a person, although you have a state and everything, but it's the idea. Because if the state said, we're not going to charge the officers, then people, they presume, will continue to riot. So in this case, the lie itself functions as the object. You have the trials. The trial is supposed to be this fair thing that often is supposed to be represented by the balances. Yeah. Every single person that's involved in that process, except for the defendant, works for the state. So you're up against the state. The state's suing you. Number one lawsuits on the planet, United States, 95%. Last time I checked. And the state is paying the judge to oversee the lawyers who are licensed by the state. Even in the trial process itself, there's oppositional staging in the record. Whereas, for example, if somebody objects, if somebody discloses information, this is supposed to not be permitted. So the defense, they may object. But guess what? The information's already been disclosed. The appearance is that your defense is working for you. Nevertheless, the information's already out there. If they say, oh, this person had a drug charge 5 years ago. It's irrelevant. As soon as the jury knows that, you may have oppositional staging, you have today, the history is being written, rewritten, always being written. A man would like the history to be defined in his interest. However, that's not always practical, neither convenient, for example, because if people become aware of how it works, then they become suspicious and resistant to your message. So, for example, when man knows that people have become aware, of how, this thing they call capitalism, which is really common law, has evolved through bondage and suffering, torture, and murders of people. People become aware. So there's now a need to write that story, and show those gruesome details. Gruesome. And hey, it might even be told well. Again, a lot of it's gonna have to do with the model. Who are the actors? Who's the director? Someone said we're gonna give these people, they call them black. He said black is a color that represents evil. We'll call these people black, and we're gonna let them direct this film. So people assume that the film is got some good stuff. Sometimes these people have even branded themselves, right, as being worthy. Then once people once they got people's attention, then they flip. They come with a lie. But people trust it because they trust the model. Again, this model, it can be an actor, but it can also be a bad actor. And if you're looking to drive people against you, you get the bad model, and then whatever the bad model is doing, people won't want to do it. See what I'm saying? But with the history, it's the story. Now, like I said, the model may be good, the story may not be true. However, the story may be true, and the model good. But now, it's the association of the production company or the publication company. So, for example, Amazon. Oh yeah, we're going to tell you about these things. 13th Amendment, right? It's associated with a company that has destroyed the traditional economics, mom and pops, and it is moving people towards a microchip. No man may buy or sell. That's my opinion, based on this video footage. It's all about the associations. Once Babylon knows people are against one object, they can use that to propel people towards another. When you are listening to the news, often they're going to tell you, they're going to have a guest. This guest is going to tell you about the problems of the company that's been ripping people off. The guest is working for the company. So now that people know about what this company's been doing, they're going to say this, but they're going to counter it with some kind of a solution to say, the company's working. Facial recognition is bias. This is how they introduce it. So people think, wow, these folks must be worth listening to if they're saying facial recognition is bias. They're being truthful. They're not just selling it and saying, hey, this thing's perfect. They're showing its flaws. So they must be worth listening to. Well, what they're not doing is telling you about all the other things, the other issues to do with this concept. So sometimes this oppositional staging functions merely as a diversion, just to keep from looking and seeing what it is that they need to discover the truth. When the guest, the host, get together, they may have multiple guests. Some of them are supposed to be on one side, and some of them are supposed to be on the other side. It's all in the language. How convincing is their argument. So a lot of times they just have a superior argument assigned to one guest or another. You could see this on YouTube where, for example, somebody may say, oh, I'm against pornography, so they're gonna interview a porn star or somebody involved in that industry and ask them weak questions and not really come at these people. Yeah. If anything, just don't get aggressive. We realize now that these world classes, one thing that they don't tolerate is aggression. Maybe it's something to think about because they are themselves the aggressors. And this aggression is not always sticks and stones. It's really this form of mind control. To get all to come and worship and serve